thinking about like what Texan identity has to offer, like both the future of the country and like art. I think that might be it there. Like Texans love Texas, and we love who we are as a state, and we love who just our identity. And right now, I think the West in general is really struggling with self-loathing. Welcome back, everyone. This is the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. I'm your host, Peter, and I have with me my brother, JP.
Hey.
Hello, JP.
Hey, everybody.
We are Catholic artists and filmmakers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art. And we're doing that through stories, and not just any kind of stories, but stories, good stories, entertaining stories, stories that capture the interest and imagination of anyone, not just Catholics and not just Christians. This week, we're continuing on our podcast from last week. And last week, we were talking about Texas, my favorite country. Yep, I said it. But last week, we're really diving into the history of Texas and how we got our start and what kind of makes us unique. But we left off kind of pondering a question on what we think the future holds for Texas. What direction are we going? And how do we preserve our identity in this time of great change? And should we be preserving our identity? What kind of ways do we need to adapt? So let's go ahead and dive right into that. What are your thoughts on that, JP?
Yeah, well, I think as I was, when we ended our conversation, we spoke about how Texas is so much more diverse right now. It allows for a more diverse way of life, a more diverse way of being able to think. There's not as much of a necessity for us to all think the same way here in Texas. And when we left off on that point, throughout the next 7 days since we last chatted about on our podcast recording here, I was thinking about how someone from the other side would say, well, that's not going to last very long. Texas is becoming liberal. It's becoming more and more blue. Texas is going to be like California and New York. And that's something that people of Texas are always concerned about, right? How often do we see the signs saying, oh, California, don't California my Texas, or something like that, or liberals stay home, or things like that. Because the fact of the matter is that if you're a liberal, you can come to Texas and be very comfortable. No one's going to bother you. On the other hand, if you are a conservative and you live in California, we are always under attack with that way of thought. So it's not a mutual sort of feeling between the two parties, at least the way it feels right now. So that is a concern. That is a concern that should be addressed. Like, okay, well, is Texas really no longer going to be different? And I hope you and I can kind of muse on that problem. That was the one that was kind of occurring to me the most over the past week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a few thoughts that occur for that. Like, it is an interesting question because when you have just the huge, like you see it, examples of it happening, like I think a good example of a state that was once like very, like just recently very conservative and then became very liberal is like Colorado and Arizona, because like, I think Arizona still can kind of go either way, but just because of its proximity to California, it just has that influx of people leaving California, and the first place that they stop there is Arizona, and then also Colorado. And so like you see, I have friends over in Colorado who are telling me like, yeah, like we really hate the Californians coming in all the time because they're like just changing everything about our state and our identity.
What does that mean? What is that? Let's dive into that. Like, because, I hear that as well here, obviously. When we say we hate Californians coming in and changing everything about our identity, what can we be more specific?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think this is where I was going to kind of make my point is that I think that there is a difference because just last week we were discussing where Texan identity comes from, and like what it means to us, and what it means to Texans. And I don't think that states like Arizona and Colorado necessarily have that. Like, not saying that they don't have state pride, which I'm sure many of them do, but they don't have that history of that revolutionary history, you know, that founding of its own country. And so I think that for Californians to come in and change that kind of Texan identity would be a different hurdle. It might be possible, but it's an entirely different ballgame in my mind between coming in and changing like Arizona or Colorado. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. It does. And I think if I was going to try and define it as well, let's say if I was going to try to define what that means to come in and change, my guess is you come in and you vote for, okay, I remember voting in California, and I tried to take this idea seriously, you know, this responsibility seriously. So I was researching, and it was demoralizing. It was absolutely, especially when it came to judges, for voting for judges, because every single judge was just, it was left, more left, 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 far left. What's the difference between far left and progressive left? Like that's the kind of the choice. Like, it was impossible to find someone who was even centrist, you know? Mm-hmm. So I guess a concern that I have is that something like that could happen here, where as voters, we no longer have an option to choose someone who even remotely represents the values, or not represents, who remotely values the values that we have, you know, that carries some sort of semblance of that. So that's a huge concern, is that everything that we think is important will become, here's a great example. I can't say too much about the story, but we'll try and do all of the story. So I work often with people who are of different mindsets than me. And one of the topics of conversation that came up were how horrible it was that Abbott, our Texas governor, was requiring that parents have a say and the ultimate responsibility on gender affirming care, which is to say that parents would be the ones who decide whether or not their child gets puberty blockers, or other types of things, should they say that they're no longer the gender that they were assigned at birth, the sex that they were assigned at birth. So this does not seem like a incredibly controversial statement, you know, from my point of view, because it does make sense that if you're going to give a child incredibly powerful drugs, that the parent should be the one to decide if that child should get those drugs, provided that the parent is not some sort of raging maniac. In that case, then there's more problems besides the decision to get this powerful drug. But the tone of the conversation did not go that way at all. Instead, the conversation was how incredibly violent Abbott is for doing this terribly evil thing to transgender kids and their families, which that tenor of the conversation doesn't make sense at all to me. I mean, it's not just that, well, can you tell me more about why you believe that parents shouldn't have this decision? Or just tell me more about your decision. You start off immediately with, the person who believes this way is evil. He's wrong, and he's not just wrong, he's evil, and he's got violent intent, and he's going to be violent. And he is being violent to children. And that sort of immediate reaction to something that, from our perspective, is not a controversial decision, is a great fear that that could happen here in Texas, because if we have values that are immediately seen as violent to someone else, like, and a value that is pretty a basic value, like, oh, parents should decide what kind of drugs their children have, or what kind of things go in their children's bodies. Well, that's a big fear. That sort of tyrannical sort of thought, where no, you don't get to decide anything about your children. We decide. So especially as someone who has a young child, that's going to be growing up. So I think it's crucial, it's vital that Texas maintain this sort of this opposition. There needs to be a pull and push between two opposite sides, so that you can come somewhere in the middle. And Texas needs to maintain. It's not just that. It's not just that I want it so much to speak. Obviously, I want it to maintain its status. But in order for there to be any sort of country still, Texas has to not be California and New York. And if Texas is no longer allowed to be Texas, if Texas is somehow infiltrated, then that's a sign that the country, the great American experiment, really is no longer working. It's over. A long thought. What do you think?
Well, I think really this is, honestly, I think this is a little bit where the art side, the art perspective comes in, because art has that ability to kind of help people see from different perspectives, right? Because what you're talking about, I've heard a little bit about it, like the gender modification kind of bills that were just recently, or this thing signed into law. I think that the perspective that many on the left are taking is that Abbott is making it so that that like people will spy on parents. Like if a parent is allowing their child to have, gender modification drugs, then they're going to like be reported to the government, basically. That's how I've seen it presented. That's how a lot of the media is presenting it. And so that is like on like, from when you present it that way, it's definitely, that seems like I can understand why someone would be concerned with that, because it sounds kind of Nazi-ish, Nazi-esque for like people to be reporting on parents and what they're doing with their children like that. But also then there's the truth that like these are gender modifying drugs are things that parents should have a say in. So like, yeah, that's a real and very like just basic a basic thing about being a parent. You're right, like about you want to have control over what kind of drugs your child is taking. That seems like not pretty basic. But yeah, there's different perspectives on that same issue. And what you're saying is kind of like being able to meet and compromise on issues. But like that, I guess a question would be like, how do you compromise on issues like that? Like, because it's such a basic tenet about being a parent. So like, what is a compromise there, but as far as like what I was saying about art, and I think that places like LA have really lost this, where their art that comes out of there is just not it's not telling stories. Basically, they're not telling stories about the human experience, about just like anything that's really real and tangible, because so many things that come out of there now are just, they're telling the agenda first and then the story second, if they get to it at all. Like I think we've bashed Eternals multiple times on this on this podcast, but we'll bash it again. Like it doesn't make sense for them, like they just put things into the story that don't belong there. Like they don't make any sense in the story. Like it's cool to have a really diverse cast, but like you need a reason for like why the same race of people are completely different races, you know? Like it doesn't make sense. They explain to me what the reasoning behind this is. Or like the Black Widow movie. Like it's cool that there's like a secret society of like woman assassins, but explain to me like why these women are like, why they're being groomed to be assassins like this. Like what is the reasoning for them being all women? Like it doesn't make sense. It's cool that that's there, but so like just give me a reason so I can like understand and get behind the story. And so it's just like, where was I going with this? I was going, it just makes it's important. I think that I think that's where you can kind of meet in the middle, where you can kind of see from different perspectives when you're just telling a story, when you're just saying, like presenting people as human beings and not as some kind of point that you're trying to make. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Well, art follows culture. And culture follows art. They kind of go hand in hand with each other. So if the culture wants something that challenges, that forces you to actually think about your position and your belief, then it's going to go. Then that type of art will be created. That type of art will be presented to the mass audience. If the mass audience no longer wants that, then it's, it probably won't be made, and if it is made, no one will watch it. I think it's very comforting, the fact that the Eternals did terribly. I think it's very comforting, the fact that Black Widow did terribly, because they can very easily be seen through the lens of propaganda films, for the reasons that you just described. I think it's more frightening when a director, I have right, because for some reason I was really wanting to, it was present in my mind quite a lot to think about Leni Riefenstahl. Here, let me share my screen. Leni Riefenstahl is one of the greatest directors of her time. And she was responsible for making many Nazi propaganda war films. She was Hitler's favorite film director. And she was brilliant. It doesn't, just because you're making a propaganda film doesn't mean that it's bad. Like a propaganda film doesn't necessarily mean it's artistically inferior, so to speak, maybe not artistically inferior, technically inferior. I would probably posit that it's artistically inferior because it's a propaganda film, but technically it doesn't have to be a badly made film. And her films were not badly made. They were great. I need to watch more.
Well, being intrinsically evil, for any government listening.
Well, I mean, it's so interesting because she was able to play dumb at the end of the whole World War II era, and she didn't get processed as a war criminal or anything like that, because she just said, "Oh, I didn't realize they took advantage of me." And anybody that watches her films knows that she is anything but an idiot. She's a brilliant woman, and she managed to do the "oh, I'm so stupid" sort of thing and got out of anything that was terrible.
That's crazy.
Which actually goes to show how smart she was. She was able to play. She was able to play the Allies. And it's very concerning. Like, it'll be concerning if propaganda films start doing really well. If propaganda films like The Eternals really show that we want that, we want that sort of fodder, because her films did really well, and it showed that the German people wanted propaganda at the time. It's never just one person, that's responsible. Hitler is not the only one responsible for all the atrocities that happened in Nazi Germany. In some degree, all of Germany was responsible. I mean, we've talked about in past podcasts about that great film by Terrence Malick, A Hidden Life. That lone protagonist that was out saying, no, this is not okay. We cannot simply bow to what Hitler's doing, and refuse to fight in the Nazi army, is an example of how difficult that is, though, to actually stick your neck out against this common culture and say, no, this is not okay. So you will probably, if you were, Jordan Peterson has a wonderful point where he says, you will probably be the SS officer. If you're in Nazi Germany at the time, you're probably the SS officer that's mistreating, that's terrorizing, that's torturing the Jews. You're probably not the person that is in a hidden life and saying, I refuse, and getting killed for it. You're probably not that person. You're probably the SS officer, that run-of-the-mill terrible person. That's probably you. And that thought rings true to me. I don't want to be tested that way. Heaven help keep me from that test, because I probably would be that person. And that's a horrible, terrible thought to internalize. So propaganda films that flop are comforting. That's a long way of saying propaganda films that flop are comforting, and propaganda films that do really well are terrifying to me.
Can you think of an example of a propaganda film that's done really well?
Well,
besides Nazi ones.
Yeah, we're thinking more modern, right?
Modern, yeah.
Here's the problem is that I get angry very easily. I have a temper. I have a temper.
For anyone who hasn't realized yet.
And I don't like putting myself in situations where I get angry. And so because of that, I feel like I haven't watched too many propaganda films, or films that could be propaganda films. So that will color my response. But from what I've heard, I would assume that a film that fits the description of a propaganda film that did really well would be, what was that movie that did so well with the blue people, that blue aliens,
Avatar?
Avatar. Yeah. I would posit that Avatar is an example of a propaganda film that did really well, but I haven't seen it because I think it'll make me upset. And that's the problem that I have, is that I don't watch a lot of films because I'm like, I just don't want to get angry.
Life is too short.
Yeah, here's a film that I'm not sure you can call it a propaganda film. It might just be a bad film, but it did really well. Frozen. I think it's close to a propaganda film in how it really attacks at the root of parental decisions in a lot of ways. I mean, it really presents parents as not being able to make decisions for their children, and just being, kind and loving parents, but are parents who just are completely inept and not capable of responding to the forces of primal nature that are within their children. Which I think you see that type of mindset in a lot of what's being passed right now in states like California and New York, that Texas is fighting against at this moment, where they're saying no, parents need to be able to make the decisions for their children. So that's a bit of a propaganda film in my mind, although I haven't really decided if it's propaganda or if it's just poor filmmaking. But it did well.
That is very true. Both of those movies did extremely well. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point about Avatar, because it's clearly you don't even have to watch the movie. You can just watch the trailer and just clearly it has an anti-European, anti kind of colonial.
Yeah, anti-colonialism. Yeah, that's a very common thought these days in the typical art, and it's a mirror of the value of the left, which is everything that exists from the West is bad, and everything that existed that's not the West either existed after the West became what the West is, and or existed before, is good. So that means that the new age sort of religiosity is good, and the that sort of pantheistic vision of Mother Earth is also good.
That's actually, sorry, I didn't interrupt.
Go ahead.
That I think kind of makes me think here. We're thinking about like what Texan identity has to offer, like both the future of the country and like art. I think that might be it there. Like Texans love Texas, and we love who we are as a state, and we love who just our identity. And right now, I think the West in general is really struggling with self-loathing, like at least imposed self-loathing, like from Hollywood and from governments. Oftentimes, like I remember Obama constantly like apologizing to other countries for like past transgressions, which like we had nothing to do with. And so like I think that could be it there. That like, hey, actually, no, we've done a lot of good. Like, yeah, we've made many mistakes, but we're not intrinsically bad. Like, I think we have our identity is good, and we can continue to build off of that.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a huge key that you've hit upon, is that we need to recognize what is good in our heritage. It's not all good, just like we are not all good. We have a propensity to be that SS officer. Therefore, we are not just angels. We are not just pure spirits that come into this world. So you take that understanding, and then you apply it, though. You apply that understanding, that lens, and you see, okay, there is something in my nature that should be watched out for. Therefore, there should be something in my culture that should be watched out for. Mm-hmm. However, let's look at my culture through a lens as at least as neutral. Let's say, what is out there that we've done that may be bad? What is out there that we've done that is pretty incredible? For example, Sam Houston being able to outsmart Santa Anna with a vastly superior army at under Santa Anna is pretty incredible. I don't think that most people today would have been able to win the Texas War for Independence should they be given command of it. I don't think most commanders in the army right now would have that ability to do that. I don't know, Peter, you might be able to speak better to that.
I could, but I can't.
So there are things that are incredible about our heritage, and that's something that in Texas we actually understand. We take pride in remembering the Alamo. We take pride in visiting Texas missions. Neighborhoods still are like the neighborhood that you and I grew up in, take pride in being this culture that is still, a part of this mission. We were Mexican Americans that grew up around the Texas mission. How historical can you get? I mean, it was probably jettisoned into our bloodstream by just how we grew up. Mm-hmm. So it's a singular characteristic about Texas that the rest of America used to have but is lost, and Texans are still holding on to. And you're right, it's key that we hold on to it if we want to be able to continue to be that voice that is contra California and contra New York.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I guess to be clear, like I think that not everyone outside of Texas is self-loathing. That there are many. You weren't saying this, but just in case anyone would misunderstand, there are many like places throughout the country like that I've been to, where there's a very grounded, very kind of more balanced view and understanding of the world, and that they're still like, yes, we're Americans, and America is not perfect, but it's good. And it can be good. But I think that's why so many people also outside of Texas who have that like more grounded, more balanced view also still like appreciate Texas, because it's as a state, that's who we are. Because like people in like Ohio, for example, like very many grounded people, but the state like is kind of flip-flops. You know, it goes like sometimes it's good, and then sometimes it just does like crazy things. So people can look to Texas as something that's still as a state really holding on to that identity. But that kind of makes me think, like, if we're talking about how good art is not telling propaganda and not pushing an agenda before a story, or before like that humanity of the art, then how come very often I would say that like artistic environments usually like will tend towards
Great question.
often tends toward like leftism, honestly. Like you have places like LA, in the most artistic city in Texas is Austin, and Austin is the most leftist city in Texas. So like why is that?
Yeah. Well, you know, Jordan Peterson has some interesting things to say about that. How he says that openness to experience is a trademark. That sort of that characteristic of your personality, openness to experience, is a trademark of every artist, or most artists. I don't think he would speak in that broad sweeping of generalization, but most artists have that openness to creativity. And that's also a trademark of the left. He says your political persuasion is mostly is tied very directly to that sort of characteristic of your psyche. So that would lead me to say that artists are generally open to experience, and therefore artists generally are of the left, and therefore a gathering of artists is generally more towards the left. But that doesn't quite follow in this modern day and age, because our experience of gatherings of artists have shown that it's the opposite of openness to experience. So I think there is a shift happening, and this is really exciting to me. Because in the past, artistic meccas would be of the left, you know, because that is required. I think I believe the data that Peterson has presented to us, that generally artists are more open to experience. However, the left is no longer open to experience. Maybe at one point the left was open. Maybe that at one point, maybe it's something before you and I were around. There was a sort of desire to listen to every viewpoint and then talk about it in the left, but that doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, I would call that liberal, not leftist. Like liberal
sure,
to me
maybe
is that accepting of other views in some way. But I feel like today's what are considered liberals are not liberals at all. They're left, and left is not accepting of other views.
That's a great distinction. And that's exactly where my hope lies for an artistic mecca, for a center of trade and art to be growing and exploding here in Texas, is because every artist is not every, let me rephrase that. Many artists are not going to be okay with being told what to think, because artists often by definition, as Peterson said, want to be open to experience. They want to be open to different viewpoints. Therefore, if the left is no longer open to that dialogue, then artists will be creating a center that is open to dialogue, and therefore not of the left, because the left is no longer has that characteristic. So I think that there is a great opportunity here for conservatives who wish to create a great center for art. This is the time that we need to be talking. We need to be dialoguing with everyone and anyone who is willing to talk to us. Because right now the lines are being shifted. it's scary, it's frightening how the left is shutting down thought, is shutting down dialogue. But if the conservatives use this as an opportunity to talk and welcome in everyone that's being outcast right now, and it's not just going to be conservatives that are outcast, it's going to be many, many different types of people that are out, that are going to be thrown out of polite society. If we're A, hold on to our values, and then B, be willing to speak to other values, and then welcome people in and say, okay, I don't agree with you, but let's still have you around because you're really good at what you do. This is the time where conservative centers for art can become the new Los Angeles, can become the new New York. I think this is the time when Houston and Dallas, these are two major metropolis, are they have a capability of becoming a center for art, because even though they are more conservative than Austin, that does not necessarily need to mean that they're repellent to artists, provided us conservatives are willing to speak, are willing to dialogue, and not waver in our beliefs, because then we just become New York, we just become Los Angeles. But if we are firm in what we believe instead, and hold on to it, but at the same time be wanting to speak, this is a great opportunity.
Can you more expound on, like, what do you mean by speak, as far as holding on to your identity but also speaking? What do you mean by that?
Well, I think there's a danger in that we want to stereotype or characterize the those that don't hold or believe what we believe. And there's that's pretty biblical. You think about it, the Israelites were told to not withstand, to not allow the pagan idolaters to be within their midst. They were told to drive them out. And so there is I think, a tendency for those of the conservative persuasion to want to drive out those sort of pagan idolaters, which would be, in this case, someone who does not understand, does not believe what we believe. But if we allow them to be within our midst, and this is something that the Romans did so well. The Romans, when a Roman army moved in and took over our barbarian territory, they looked and they found what was good about it, and they kept it, they borrowed it. And we need to have that sort of Roman mentality in this day and place. I mean, we have not abolished the old law, but as Christians, we have a new law, which is under Christ, which says we preach to all people and to all nations. And our way of preaching should be hearing what someone who does not hold our beliefs has to say, find what we think is good, because there's probably something good in it. I'm willing to bet there's something that we can agree upon. Find that, agree upon it, and incorporate that belief into our own. Because I do not think it would be possible for us to find someone who is willing to dialogue with us, who is willing to live within our midst, and not find something of this person's beliefs that's worth learning from, that's worth incorporating and growing our own understanding of the world around us. So I see this as this sort of dialogue as a sort of, no, we are not going to, there are certain things that we shouldn't vacillate on. We shouldn't vacillate on slavery. Every person should be entitled with the equal rights as instilled by our Creator. So slavery is not something that we can compromise on. Abortion is not something, because every person is instilled with equal rights. Abortion is also not something that we can compromise on, because abortion is even more detrimental to human rights than slavery is. And so dialoguing does not mean compromising on our basic beliefs. But maybe if we dialogue with someone who does disagree with us about abortion, we can find what common ground we have and agree upon and do that. Like, so I oftentimes when I dialogue with people who are pro-abortion, we'll agree with almost 99%,
Yeah.
So if there's a way we can just say, okay, well, let's use that 99% and let's get that on the law, on the books, then that would be incredibly useful.
Yeah, oftentimes like those debating someone over abortion is a game of cognitive dissonance, I think.
Yeah.
Like talking about, yeah, okay, so we both value human beings. We both agree that violence is bad. We both, and all these different things. And then at the end, you still there's still like a failure to connect there. And you're like, what? I don't understand. But I think what you're talking about here is like finding the common humanity that we have with people who disagree with us. And that is definitely what California and New York are just completely throwing out the window. That people who disagree with you can still be human. And I think like a little bit of it's almost this saying that is almost hypocritical, because I think that like we're portraying them as subhuman for not seeing humanity of other people. So that's not what I'm trying to do, but it's I think what we're saying here is that it's a dangerous thing to be doing, to be dehumanizing those you disagree with. And it's understandable to humanize them. It's an understandable trap to fall into, because when you hold something very passionately, anyone who disagrees with you, it's almost like a touching a hot pan or something. It's like, oh my gosh, like this is bad. I need to this needs to be pushed as far away from me as possible. So it's hard oftentimes to dialogue or to see the humanity in someone that you disagree with. But it's something that's very important in order for society to continue. And as far as like Houston or Dallas kind of becoming like the next New York or LA, I think that there is a lot of potential there. There's a lot of potential. A lot can change, but we do have a lot to offer in that regard. And I think even Austin is like, obviously lots of people are flocking to Austin right now. And I think Austin is not beyond hasn't gone full on LA yet. It still has a lot of potential to be very good as well. I remember their city council is crazy, like straight up insane. And among many other things, I remember they actually they passed like the similar law as LA, where they all right, homeless people can be anywhere that they want and can camp out anywhere, and we won't do anything to stop them. And the citizens of Austin did a citizen vote and overturned that city council thing. So that makes me think Austin is still Texan. It's not beyond. It hasn't gone full on crazy, because it was causing problems. You would go to downtown Austin, which is a beautiful area, but there would be huge homeless encampments with people with just doing drugs or and there was violence every night, so it's bad for the citizens and bad for the homeless people. And so the citizens of Austin were like, nah, fam, not about that. So yeah, that just kind of balance is it comes from seeing, I think, the humanity in the other person. And really, I think that's really what society is about in many ways. And to me, that's what art is about speaking about humanity and speaking to other humans about humanity. And those are the kinds of stories that I really enjoy telling the most. So that's what I'm very excited about.
And this reminds me of one of our favorite stories, Lord of the Rings, where Tolkien says in the Fellowship of the Ring, the Fellowship walks upon the edge of a knife. And that's where we are right now. That is very true to our modern day. We walk on the edge of a knife, and really mankind always walks on the edge of a knife. It's always an understanding of a battle. Our journey through this earth, it can always be understood through the lens of a battle between good and evil. I mean, maybe even within ourselves. So we are teetering maybe more than we've ever teetered. That's possible. I mean, there's all sorts of fears going on about World War III and our country's pushing towards civil war, and our economy in shambles, all these different things that are happening. But there's also great reasons for hope. Right now, people of our persuasion have never been presented with the opportunity to welcome in more than we can welcome in right now. But you can only welcome someone in if you have a home to welcome them into. So if we cede everything that makes our beliefs a belief, if we give up everything, then we have nothing to welcome people into, So this is a time where we need to more than ever hold on to what our tradition has been, and what our faith guides us to believe, and what our reason and logic impel us to question. And that's but if we do that, let's also use the opportunity that we have to do that in conjunction with everyone else that's been driven out. And this can become, I think, a great springtime. It's still possible that vision of that JP2, Pope John Paul II, had of a great springtime is still a real possibility. We just need to play with the hand that's been dealt us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful, and it's exciting, and there's so much going on. There's definitely cause for fear during this time, but like you're saying, we don't want that fear to be what drives us. We want that I guess the excitement, that love of humanity and of opportunity. Like, we have a great opportunity here. And decisions based on fear will not take us, I don't think, where we want to be going. So that's true. It's a great time of excitement. There's a lot changing, but there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. Well, Pete, I think we better call it quits for now, but hopefully we will, people who listen to this found this useful, and we'll, why don't you take us home?
All righty. Well, thanks for talking with me. This has been good. This has been a lot of fun. And thanks for joining us, everyone. And we are the Pinedo Brothers. We hope that you'll be joining us next time. But until then, enjoy your life.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Pinedo Brothers Podcast, an artist podcast for Catholics. We hope you enjoyed it, and if so, please consider subscribing, and commenting below. That really helps. This episode was edited and recorded by me, JP. Makeup was done by no one, if you couldn't tell. The Pinedo Brothers are Catholic filmmaking brothers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. For more information on us, check us out at pinedobrothers.com. Thanks again.